Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, May 16th, 2023, and this is episode 745 of Living Free in Tennessee. And it's a Monday show, so we have our weekly segments. These exist because way back when I started this podcast, it was a weekly podcast. Now we go 4 to 5 days a week, depending on my travel schedule at this point. And it's really it's interesting. I was thinking the other day, because we're getting really close to 1 million downloads, which is a big benchmark for me. Like back in the day, I started my podcast and the first episode got 80 listens and the second episode got 14. One of those was me, one of those was my mom, so it's really like 12. And I never in a million years at that point thought I was going to be starting to talk about having 1 million downloads of the Living Free in Tennessee podcast. So I've been thinking just a lot about all of what it's taken to build the community and who has helped a lot. So many people have helped along the way. It's really cool. Anyway, we're probably going to do a pretty cool giveaway. I think I'm going to give away 1 million Satoshis in celebration of the 1,000th download. And we'll have some instructions between now and then about how to participate in that. If you don't know what a Satoshi is, we'll get into that along the way. Anyway, today is a Monday episode, and we have usual segments, which was something that I set up way back in the day. First one is Tales from the Prepper Pantry, and we go from there. They've changed a little bit over the years, but that's just because we've changed over the years. Today, I'm going to talk about how my homegrown cooking world has been with the addition of a freeze dryer on site. I've had a freeze dryer since 2021. It's 2023 now. And I didn't originally get it thinking it was going to become part of my regular kitchen activities. And it did. And it's changed a lot how I use it 2021 to 2023. So I'll talk about that as well as all of our Monday topics. Remember, if you want to get a question in on the live stream, put your questions in all caps. The motivation for this episode came from a user who's thinking about getting a freeze dryer and wanted to know a whole bunch of different things. And I thought, well, I haven't done an episode on freeze drying in a long time. So I'll talk about the journey from beginning to end with the freeze dryer, as well as also just how to make that decision, because a freeze dryer is not an inexpensive thing. It's like $2,500 to $5,000, and that's a lot of money. So you want to think before you get a freeze dryer, but if it will benefit you, or if you can turn it into a side hustle, it's actually kind of a cool thing to have. I've also dropped my Harvest Right affiliate link in the show notes if you're interested in buying one. Do me a favor, go to episode 745, look for that link, and you will, pay me a little bit without taking any extra money out of your pocket, because I get a commission if you use those links. That's not why I talk about the Harvest Right, but I figure, since I use one anyway, I might as well have an affiliate link. Our featured event of today's episode is the Exit and Build Land Summit, where I will be heading on Thursday, and I will be there through Monday to speak twice on Saturday and see everybody else who's at the Exit and Build Land Summit in Bastrop, Texas. This comes back John Bush's from the Live Free Academy. John Bush's idea that if there's all this tyrannical crap going on and it's all being designed around these smart cities, why not exit the cities and start building something better in the country? So he came up with this idea of the Exit and Build Land Summit. He's had great speakers over the years, and he has great speakers coming up to this event, including Curtis Stone, who I have a question for that I'm going to nail him with at the event. That's my plan. Don't worry, it's not a big controversial thing. He brought up something years ago that we never talked about. And I was like, we should actually talk about this. And here is where we should be talking about this. Anyway, that's all. If you haven't gotten a ticket, grab one at livefree.academy. And it's Exit and Build Land Summit 3. I have a link in the show notes that takes you straight to registration. You can come in person. That costs money. You can attend virtually. That is free. If you attend virtually for free, you don't get all the sessions. You get some of the sessions, and they're going to try to upsell you on the rest of the sessions. That's how that works, guys. That's how That's how John makes enough money to pay for expenses for this thing and get a bit of a movement going. I have watched this event grow from 150 people to over 500 people in person, plus a vast network of digital attendees. It's a really cool event. I put a lot into going into this event, and it's because it's the kind of community that we want to see. We always talk about, hey, we need this parallel economy. Well, there is one right there. It's already existing. And there are small pools of parallel economy all over the country. We just have to get better at interacting with each other. And a great way to do that is an event like the Exit and Build Land Summit. You can go in virtually for free, or you can attend in person for some money. And of course, as I mentioned, they will upgrade you to because you're going to want the paid content once you see the free content. That's just the way that works. Anyway, I'm super excited about that. It will impact the schedule of our podcast this week. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I also wanted to talk about our first sponsor of today's show, and that is Strong Roots Resources. Carrie Brown of Strong Roots Resources reached out to me and said, hey, can I sponsor your show? And I was like, of course you can. I've seen the quality of your work because you've done work for me here. I've had 3 permaculturists do intensive work at my homestead. And well, more than 3, but 3 that, because Tactical and I are permaculturists too, but you know what I mean? Like 3 that came in. And the cool thing about that is because my objectives for the property are so clear, they all complemented each other's work. So we didn't end up like with do this, undo that, do that, undo that. And that worked out really well for me. Carrie Brown is one of those. So what he does is he comes to your property, gives you an evaluation, assesses your goals, and comes up with a permaculture plan for your property. His specialization is edible landscaping, and he can work really well in the city as well as out of the city. So he knows how to make an edible landscape that doesn't get your HOA all up in a fuss in your face, which is nice. So it can look good too, guys. It can look good. It can give you food and all sorts of those things. Anyway, if you want to find out more how to work with Carrie, go to strongrootsresources.com, and all of his information is there. Our second sponsor of today's show is the Freesteading Network. Freesteading.com launched in response to all the censorship that homesteaders have been experiencing on the big tech platforms like Facebook. And you may be thinking, why would homesteaders be experiencing any kind of censorship? Well, here's the deal. If you are a homesteader, you probably raise livestock. Facebook does not approve. And so what happened is we developed all of these homesteading communities on Facebook. And then Facebook got mad because we were selling eggs and meat. And they started censoring what we could do. So if you go to the homesteading communities now, we'll talk about raising livestock. We'll talk about livestock guardian dogs. But if you try to sell eggs, your post gets taken down. Yeah, because it goes against their community standards. Well, that's a bunch of crap. So Tag from Life Done Free and Data and a whole bunch of like that EMP Shield crew were like, hey, we're going to start a place where we can actually talk about these things openly. And they called it freesteading.com. Freesteading.com works a lot like Facebook used to work. So it's, it's new technology, so it doesn't have all their features. It doesn't have algorithms. Like you just see what people post based on who you follow. That's over at freesteading.com. They've got an events calendar too, where a lot of homesteading events are pulled together. So thanks to freesteading.com for sponsoring today's show. Finally, if you have a question or want to send me feedback, you can do that via email, Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com, or go to livingfreeintennessee.com. Click on contact, fill out that form. Those emails come to me. With that, I'm going to go straight into today's first segment. That's Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about storing what you use and using what you store. And most of what I store and most of what I use comes from here now. And I think about 15 years ago when I came to the conclusion that I should have a pantry, because I lived far away from the store and it seemed like a good idea to be able to just rotate stuff through rather than go to the store every 20 seconds and drive 45 minutes doing it. And back then it was a shopping list rotation. Now it's a better get this thing grown. And like I have had a fire lit under my butt this year because the farmer's market disappeared. So I usually count on getting a bushel or 2 bushels of green beans from them. So we're kicking it up. I was talking to Tactical about yesterday about where else can we plant stuff? And keep up on it, right? So right now I am drying herbs and flowers for winter tea. And in particular, rose petals, wild rose petals are almost over. So getting them now is important, or you have lost your window. And then the second thing, and those are good. Like if you feel a cold coming on, put some wild rose petals in your tea, and that can help your body fight that off. This is not a medical claim. Do not take this as medical advice. Anyway, red clover is the other one. Now, red clover is interesting because it's purple, but it's called red clover and it grows wild all over. And the reason I've chosen these two this year is that when I'm on my walks, what I've noticed is certain plants speak to me. I admire them. I want to touch them. I'm like, oh, that plant's so cute. And every time that happens to me, I look up like the herbal impact of that plant. And usually it's something that my body is dealing with. And this year, for whatever reason, I haven't actually looked it up yet. Red clover is the thing I see all the time. And so I decided what that means is I need to harvest a bunch of red clover. Now, the last time that happened, it was mullein, and it was 2019. And I already knew mullein helped you with breathing issues, and I got very ill. And I was very glad I didn't even have to drag my sick butt out the door to go find mullein in the holler, because I had some dried in my tea cabinet. So that's just, that's kind of how I choose what I store. Like I'll have a bunch of dried comfrey in case we have strains or anything like that over the winter. But because one year I should have done that and didn't do that. Boy, did I pay the price. Luckily, a friend of mine had some. But this year, it's rose petals and red clover. I'm just going to go with that. Those are things I like to harvest early in the morning before the sun beats on them. It's not great to harvest them in the rain, and we've been having a struggle with that. So I am going to end up harvesting them in the rain, and then I'll just dry them flat on a sheet in the house. I don't actually apply heat to that. I dry them at room temperature. I scored a bunch of dried morel mushrooms because I didn't find any morel mushrooms this year. And they were given to me in a big bag. I'm actually now repackaging those into mason jars with O2 absorbers just to keep them longer. And I'll be integrating dried morels into recipes for the next year. I'm actually pretty stoked about it. It was about $100 worth. I traded $100 of stuff for these morel mushrooms. And I love doing barter, guys, especially when it's something I want. And no regrets at all. It's like this big, I don't know, it's as big as a quarter bushel of morel mushrooms. We are doing meal planning from the freezer. As a result of being overcommitted the first quarter of this year and with all the stuff going on getting in the way, I ended up not being as good on meal planning, although I would still cook mostly from what we had here, except for my kitchen was ripped up with takeout, like actual takeout, which is weird because I don't usually do that. And now that the Living Free in Tennessee workshop is over and things are kind of like, I reclaimed the rest of my kitchen counter this weekend like there's just event cooking stuff that's not usually in my kitchen and all sorts of stuff. I got that back this weekend. And it's another busy week because I'm getting ready to go out of town. And that means, double cooking. We'll talk about that and a whole bunch of other stuff. But what I know is that if we go into a busy time, like prepared for that from a meal planning standpoint, we do really well. So really the question last night was like beef, lamb, chicken, rabbit, or fish or pork. And then once we chose what kind of meat we were having, which actually it turns out that answer is venison and back today. I could pull that out of the freezer this morning, get it defrosted, and be able to have it ready to go. What I've been doing formerly is like, crap, it's 4:00. I got to cook something. I guess we're having steak because I can throw that in the sous vide from frozen and run it for an hour to 2 hours and sear it off and it's done. And then I just do whatever side dishes, right? Well, that's not how I like to operate. I actually like to work a little bit more ahead than that. I just hadn't been the first quarter of this year. So it actually feels really good to be back in that place. I am getting ready to be gone for 5 days. What this means Schedule wise, I think we already talked about that. There are 2 live episodes this week, and the rest, there's 4 total episodes. One is previously recorded with Neethi. It's a great conversation. You're going to not want to miss that. And the other one is that the redneck is hijacking my podcast on Friday. He's doing one of the live streams, the Homestead Happenings live stream, which he's well suited to do. But I also need to get ready meal wise, because what happens when one person is gone from the hauler, it's more work for the person who's left in the hauler, right? So the hauler neighbors are going to help us with moving the chicken tractor daily, but Tactical's got a lot more on his plate, so cooking is not like the easiest thing for him. Usually I'm like, I make a meatloaf, I leave it in the fridge. We used up almost all my ground beef at the spring workshop, so I don't actually have much ground beef anymore. And that was different than last year, but this year I used more of my beef in the chili, and then one of the bags of chili opened up in the sous vide and became chili water. And I guess we wasted probably, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we about 15 pounds of beef probably went into the water, and that hurts. But we couldn't serve it, we couldn't salvage it. It was, I guess we could have, but it wouldn't have been tasty at all. So what that means is there are 5 days where eggs and bacon are easy, that's ready to go. 5 days where meals need to be done. And I talked to Tactical. I was like, what do you want for that? And he said, really what's best for him if he's cooking is that it's boneless meat that he can saute up real quick into something. And so what I'm leaving him are a combination of, there will be leftovers from whatever. I'll probably do a big pork roast or something on Wednesday, so that Thursday is handled with. The first day of somebody being gone is the worst day of somebody being gone usually. So leftovers that day, and then individual meals from the freezer. The good news is I already have most of those cooked. I just need to pull them out and say, I don't care what day of the week you do it, but here's an entree for each day. And then at the same time, because of my weird allergy to soy really getting in my way, and all bean things, I have a hard time eating at events. It's one of the reasons I don't really like to speak at more than one event a month, is I've got to figure out how to eat while I'm at the event. And I'm allergic. I'm so allergic. I got so sick after Next Steps that it lasted for over a month. And I don't want to do that to myself again. So I have been cooking and freeze drying meals so that I know I have pure food when I'm on the road. And that's just I've got 2 entrees with me for the Bastrop, Texas event. I have access to a kitchen and a grocery store there, so I'll be fine for that. Plus, I've been in Bastrop and have some idea of where I can get food while I'm at the event. I'll totally be able to eat at the VIP dinner because that's just beef and that's hard to mess up. I usually can't eat their lunches because there's too much risk of cross-contamination because they serve vegans as well. So, and it's a vegan thing that gets me. So I just usually put some hot water in a bowl and eat my chili or whatever if I'm hungry. And that's just extra work like that to get ready to go out of town, to get, it's how that travel works. I have not restocked the pantry with grocery store items since the spring workshop 2 weeks ago. What I did going in was I didn't buy, if I was like, hey, we need to use ketchup, and there was ketchup in the pantry, I didn't actually buy it. I was like, we'll use what's here, and then if I feel I need to restock it, I will. Well, I don't actually eat ketchup. The only reason I have ketchup on hand is because occasionally when I make meatloaf, somebody wants that ketchup glaze that everybody likes, but there's so much sugar and crap in ketchup, I prefer not to eat it. I like to make homemade ketchup. And so then, I just thought that we'll see. So we used a bunch of stuff. A lot of my oils, I don't cook with oils anymore. I pretty much just cook with animal fat. And we used all the oils up. We used, a whole bunch of things that I don't really use anyway. So I thought, why restock? The only thing I thought I might need were paper goods, and I had actually gotten extra paper goods. That was one thing I got before the event, because you do not want to run out of toilet paper when you have, 65 people using the outhouse. It's not a good look to run out of toilet, especially if you're a prepper. Not a good look to run out of toilet paper. So I think I'm not going to restock. I may do a restock sometime this summer if I feel like I need something in particular. But as we've walked away from grocery store rotation to see what we can regenerate here, the sorts of things I need are like vinegar, salt, spices, I like Worcestershire sauce, so I get Worcestershire sauce, but I have lots of Worcestershire sauce right now, and I had to learn how to say that stupid word because I saw it spelled. I knew how to say it, and then I saw it spelled, and then I was Worcestershire sauce. Yeah. So next week is the home canned goods audit, and we'll see how we did. I thought we were going to use all my green beans at the spring workshop. We didn't, so I have a few jars of those left. Right now, if we don't need them as a side dish, I'm actually stocking them for next year. My goal is 55 jars, and I ended up with more than 55 jars last year. So that just starts me down the road of getting to my goal of 55 jars canned of green beans. Okay, before we go into the next segment, I do want to talk about our live stream schedule. Tomorrow, we're going to try with Joel Salatin again at 12:30 Central. You're not going to want to miss that, but I can't promise it'll work because his rural internet is not always awesome. So today at 12:30, I have a tech check scheduled with him. If that goes well, we'll be on my YouTube channel with John Willis and Joel Salatin streaming over Zoom. I haven't figured out how to stream from Zoom to 2 channels, so we're just going to my channel. Then I'll send that video to John Willis so he can produce it for his channel, however he'd like to do. And there is not a specific link for that. You just need to go to Living Free in Tennessee on Zoom. I do have that link to my YouTube channel in the show notes. That's 12:30 Central. If Joel Salatin and I don't go live, then you're just going to get the Nicole Unplugged show. That's what'll happen then. And then Friday, I will be hijacked by a redneck as Tactical Redneck grabs my channel for the weekly Homestead Happenings update. That's 10:30 Central. The link to that is in the show notes as well. For those of you on the live stream, the way you find the show notes is you go to livingfreeintennessee.com, and it's the episode with the title Homegrown Cooking with a Freeze Dryer, or episode 745. Okay, it's time for the weekly shopping report from Joe. We haven't had this for a few weeks. I don't know if he wasn't posting them or I couldn't find them, but for like 3 weeks, I kept going to MeWe looking for his update, and I wasn't finding it. And I saw him post it over the weekend, and I was like, I see that is there. I should be able to find that, and indeed, I found it. So we have a May 13th. He posted this on May 13th. He went on 2 shopping trips, so I edited some of the stuff out, but I kind of kept it to the standard ones we report on. So Dollar Tree was first. They've added a couple cases of Monster to the rear drink coolers. In addition to my usual caffeine delivery mechanism, I noted a decent stock of plastics while picking up a few other items. The food aisle seems less haphazard, and there's a couple people in there stocking shelves. The health aisle had a lot more on it. Next was Home Depot. There was no tag on the stacks of the 2x4x8 studs for pricing, so I looked online and found it was still $3.35 per 2x4. Last on this trip was Aldi. We found everything we wanted. Eggs are down about 10 cents a dozen to $1.87. Whole milk is $3.50 a gallon. I did notice that people were friendly with no one seeming tense or worried. I think I only saw one mask during the second trip. Untainted regular gasoline remains at $3.99 per gallon. So thanks, Joe, for that. Next up, we have a frugality tip from Margot, and this came right after the spring workshop, but I had another one queued up. If you'd like to get a frugality tip in, I'm all out, guys, which means there won't be one next week unless somebody from the audience sends it to Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com. Anyway, Margot says, hey, all, I'm going to tell you to spend some money, but this is a frugality tip. Yes, it is. Sometimes you need to spend money to get something of value. We just got back from our first LFTN workshop, and the ticket price was well worth the value we received. The price of the ticket cannot buy the connections we made. The bonus was all of the things we learned. If you feel like you can't afford a ticket to a workshop, grab a can, and every time you break, let's say a $20 bill, put the change in the jar. Before you know it, you'll be able to afford the things you didn't think you could. I could not stress how important community is, and without going to workshops that follow your interests, you will not find your most important community members. You have almost a year to save for LFTN. Okay, so if your budget is tighter than Margot's on the 20, every time you break a 1, do it and see how much you save. I literally use this method all the time. I have jars with dedicated purposes. at my house. I have been saving in this way for tires for my car, which run about $1,200, and it's now about time. And I knew about a year ago, I'm going to need tires, and no matter what, I'm going to have to pay for the tires. So every time I sold something on the homestead, or if I had change, it went into the jar, and I've got $840 in that jar. So I only have to come up with 400 more to get the tires this time, as opposed to, needing to locate $1,200. We're doing this for a zero-turn motor. With any time we sell something homestead related, it's going into a jar for a zero-turn mower for tactical. That method works really great for me, and it's a good way to save for anything, workshop or not. And she's right. Sometimes you have to spend money to get ahead in life, or to address something, or to find community, or to build some of the strength that you need. I realized we talk about poverty mindset, and I realized this year I've gotten out of the poverty mindset, but I'm still getting out of the poverty mindset. There are still times when I say I can't afford it, when what the deal is, I don't choose to afford it. I'm prioritizing other things. And when I start realizing I'm prioritizing something over something else, it gets away from this I can't-ism that you have. I wish I had that patch that I just got from Toolman Tim today, because I would show it. And Tactical's not here for me to bring it into my studio, so we'll have to show it another time. I'll see if he can put it on Friday. Anyway, when you have that I can't perspective, it's like you're lacking something, as opposed to admitting to yourself you prioritize other things. And then if you really aren't prioritizing other things and you really do need the tires, then how can I becomes the thing. And, it's amazing how much small change and small bills can add up without hurting your overall budget. I'm also the person who puts 10% of what I earn straight into a savings account for myself. Pay yourself first, guys. Pay yourself first. Next up is Operation Independence. And I originally thought there would be nothing here. I got a listener question that I think they wanted me to answer the email, and I'm not going to answer the email because there's a lot of typing and it's a busy week, but I will answer the email saying, listen to today's episode. It's from Kelsey. I'm working on a grant to be able to put up a homesteading conference center in the middle of nowhere. I know you have a variety of classes and offerings. I was wondering if you'd be willing to share with me class sizes and prices of different classes. It doesn't need to be very specific. It could be a range like $30 to $400 per class, or at anywhere from 30 to 1,000 people. Also, I'm curious about what you've seen, as if you've seen the numbers change in the last 5 years. So this is interesting. And I know a lot of you want to do classes. And that's why I thought, you know what, we'll just do it in the Operation Independence segment, because part of my independence is offering training workshops here on site, webinars online. We have a homesteading webinar coming, like how to set up your homestead, get your homestead plan for you webinar coming on June 1st, and events. And people are always surprised when they learn how much I actually take out profit-wise from events, because they think the number is much higher. They think, well, a ticket is $500 and there were 65 people at LFTN 23, so that's tens of thousands of dollars, right? No, there's a lot of expenses in events. And so I think, first of all, if you're going to start an event, really spend some time thinking about what things are going to cost and what you're going to need, because once you've made that list, you're going to end up adding to it anyway during your first event on things you didn't think of. And so be prepared for that. I think what I have seen different in the last 5 years over doing events is 5 years ago when I was launching an event, it was a lot easier to close a sale with people who were interested in coming. So the pool of people I was marketing to was smaller, people who were willing to go to an event. But the communications and closing of that was like, boom, because there were zero other options for things like cheese making, canning, homesteading and small business, fencing, like any of those topics, or even the gatherings, like the bigger picture gatherings, like the LFTN workshop or Self-Reliance Festival. I was also in a network of people who were used to paying a premium for something like the Living Free in Tennessee Spring Workshop, wherein you can go to a homesteading conference for $25 right now. And it will be more of an expo. There'll be a whole bunch of people selling stuff there. There will be presentations. You don't get a lot of time with the speakers usually because they're busy and they're in and out. And it's a totally different experience than the more intimate, we feed you all the meals. We have on-site camping. We have lots of after hours. The speakers come, the speakers stay, the speakers talk to you. That's a very different kind of event, right? But your general shopper doesn't understand the difference. They see this event for $25. I saw one for 10. I saw a prepper event for 10. And I was like, all that gives you access to is going to vendor row and buying stuff. It doesn't give you access to any of the presentations, any of the meals, or any of the reason you should be going to an event. So you're paying $10 for a shopping experience. But that wasn't clear. So what I've found is it was easier to sell 5 years ago with a smaller pool of people to sell to. Now the market is much larger, but the competition is much harder. So a lot more time and effort now goes into selling anything I do. Probably quadruple the amount of time versus 5 years ago. And if you're writing a grant, it's important to know that because it's going to be even harder a year from now, because there will be even more of these events coming up, and that's competition. I actually think it's good that that is happening, because that tells me that the zeitgeist is towards independence, self-reliance, homesteading, and small business startup, and taking ownership for your life. But if the motivation for doing homesteading conferences or a homesteading conference center is profit, beware the market saturation, because what's going to happen, it's going to build, and then it's going to be oversaturated, and there's going to be a correction, because that's how these things go. Like, we're on the uphill. We're not at the peak yet. We're going to get to the peak. And when people realize what the transition is really like, and when the fear stops selling, the market's going to shrink again, because the people who are just here because they're afraid are going to go back to quote unquote normal life, whatever the new normal is. And it will be a different normal, I think, as a result of the transition we're going through right now. .com Cowgirl, who does free range event, says events in the prepper homestead space have about doubled since I started tracking them a year ago. Yeah. And they're going to double again next year, probably, I think, because there's just so many people doing that. As far as prices, when I do an on-site workshop here, it's usually about $95. It includes lunch. I usually have a print reference for them to go home with. I have a chicken processing workshop coming up. They go home with a chicken that they've processed. So I try to add value beyond just you come and you learn. That is a half-day class. It's actually 5 to 6 hours, so it's not like 4 hours. The thing is this. I should be raising that price based on the expenses I have going into it. But I also have an ulterior motive of getting people into the Living Free in Tennessee network, getting them equipped to take care of themselves. So I'm always walking a dance, right? Between pricing and all of that. My prices may go up in the next year. We'll see. It depends on how much inflation hits, but just keep in mind that's the general price. If I was going to do like a lunch presentation on ham radio that somebody else came in on, and it was just a small thing without a lot of coordination, I might be able to get away with $65 to $75 on that. The multiple day classes, I'm at $500, and the only way I kept that price at $500 this year with the amount and quality of food that we feed people was by not letting people pay for their course in advance. Why is that? Well, I asked for a $150 deposit. This meant that it was easier for people to flake. So I had 5 no-shows, 2 of which I never heard from the person at all. Very confusing. And some of them really wanted to come and had problems come up. And a couple of them just like the schedule didn't work out at the last minute. Of that $150, I lost about $5 to $7 per transaction to credit card fees for paying the deposit. So to have charged $500 up front and gotten payment in advance, just multiply that by 5, basically. That's a significant chunk of the ticket coming out. So what we did was $150 in advance and then the rest in cash on site. And then I did a cash deposit into my bank account because it wasn't like cash I could pretend I never earned. Like that was cash that was used for expenses. And I had enough savings that in advance I could buy all the stuff I needed to. So I didn't need it in advance. That kept the ticket price down this year. I don't know what I'm doing next year to try to keep the ticket price down. I'm trying to keep it at $500. It may go up to $550 or $600 next year. It just depends on what happens with the expenses of the things I need to buy for the workshop. And that's, if you're writing a grant, just be aware you're doing this in an inflationary time. So building will get more expensive than the bid you get right now, all of that. So that's just my perspective. I do workshops, 20 people max on my chicken workshop. I do 65 max on the spring workshop. For Self-Reliance Festival, the ticket price is $95, early bird of $75. And that we get sponsors for to help offset expenses. Plus, we sell a lot more tickets, but it's a different, less intimate environment than here, although it's actually a very good networking event too, and people sit around the campfire and all of that. So it's not in a bad way different, it's just different. And that we can take up to 1,000 people. We've had about 500 there. We started at 150. I would say anybody launching an event, be prepared for low attendance at first and a lot of difficulty closing the deal. And what you do about this is you do the event anyway as best you can. And if what that means is you have 20 of your closest friends willing to come for free to give it the right atmosphere, stick it out, but be prepared. I lost money on the first 4 Self-Reliance festivals. I made money for the first time was the last one 5? Yeah. So the first 3 Self-Reliance festivals, I lost money. Thousands of dollars I lost. Okay. Like not a little bit of money, thousands of dollars on 1, 2, and 3. 4 was the first time I made a profit of any kind. And that mostly went to pay staff for the first time. And then this last one, I made $10,000, basically. I'm rounding. So $10,000 for 6 months of work, more than 20 hours a week. And I just say that numbers so you know. So that took 5 times. Sorry. My head's already in SRF 6. So that's just, and other people arrange events differently and probably have done it to make more money than I do. And I hope to make more money next time, but I'm not unhappy with that is what I'm saying, but it's not as many tens of thousands of dollars that one thinks it is. So that's my thought on that. But that does play into Operation Independence. The cool thing about doing events is people see you, they get to know you, and they buy your coffee long-term. So I haven't included that benefit. Like I don't sell very much coffee at Self-Reliance Festival anymore or my spring workshop. You know why? Because most of the attendees already buy my coffee if they're coffee drinkers and they get it delivered to their home. And they're like, why would I buy it at the event? Not worth it. I got to drag it around. And .com Cowgirl says, thanks for the shout out for freerange.events. Yeah, you're in my newsletter every week too, just in case you didn't know that. Anyway, with that, it's time for the main topic of today's show, homegrown cooking with a freeze dryer. Remember, guys, if you've got a question as we go, because this is probably where you're most likely to have questions, put the first 3 words in all caps so that I see it and star it and hopefully can build it into the topic, because this is something I haven't talked about in about a year. Yeah. And you guys know I freeze dry. I mean, I've even done like the experiment of air dry versus freeze dry versus Excalibur dry herbs, and the freeze dried are way superior. And it's a fun thing in my life. But a lot of people are like, must be nice to have a freeze dryer, because that thing, it cost me $2,500 when I bought it, and they're more expensive now. Although I think they're on sale at this hot minute. But I got some email from Harvest Right about we're having a sale. The original reason I got a freeze dryer is I went hiking with my mom, and at the barter blanket at my house at my event, because we used to go hiking after the spring workshop. This year we didn't. I don't know why, but we totally should have. And we need to go hiking at least once this year, backpacking, like overnights in the woods. I got this jar of freeze-dried ground beef from Jake Robinson. It had no spices in it at all. I'm glad I figured that out before I left on the hiking trip. So I mixed that. I got some bouillon cubes. I took that. I took dried mashed potatoes, even though I'm keto, because hey, we get to do that. And then I brought jerky and a tin of smoked oysters, which I really like, smoked oysters and oil. And I showed her my bag of food before we left, and she's like, that weighs less than my food. And she's like the master of not bringing too much on these things. Like, she's a through hiker. So she's a badass, right? Oh, Harvest Right freeze dryers are $500 off. Use my affiliate link if you decide to take that deal. Anyway, so I went, and it was great. I had a little leftover food when we got back. The food was delicious. I'm really glad I had the bouillon cubes. And I was like, man, I could freeze dry so much stuff and stick to my dietary requirements and have better quality food than like Mountain House if I had a freeze dryer. And it just so happened, probably because they do this around Mother's Day every year, I think it must be, because it was about this time of year, they were on sale. And my mom goes, I'll go halvesies with you so I can make hiking meals, a thing she has never done. And I was like, great, let's do it. So I got a freeze dryer. I never accepted her halvesies offer because I was able to swing it anyway. And the freeze dryer arrived, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do all these hiker meals. And then I went down a whole rabbit hole of things that I freeze dried. I was very lucky to have Jake Robinson, who's in our network. And he reached out to me and gave me an hour free phone consultation about things you should know about the freeze dryer, like filtering the oil and all these other things. And that was like dynamite. He should just do that video, these 10 things about getting started with a freeze dryer. But the thing about Jake is he's a really good empowerer. Like, when he's really into stuff. So he will ask you incessant questions until he has all his details answered. But that's because he's super smart and he's assimilating it. And then he packages it, and he then totally like helps anybody who asks. So just remember, find Jake Robinson in our network and talk to him if you get one, or maybe we'll get him back on the show. He's been on the show once. There's a podcast with me and Jake talking about the freeze dryer. That's why I got it. And then I thought, well, some long-term food storage would be cool, but I don't really store food longer than about 2 years anyway. But, it'd be nice to have some eggs in case I need them 10 years from now. So rather than buy them, then maybe I should, start making my own from the stuff I grow here, which is higher quality and more suited to my environment. So I did that. And here's what I learned getting started. These machines are loud and hot. I thought I would be running it in my roasting shack in a little corner, and I ran it in my roasting shack to do the test run of the bread, which helps get factory smells out of it. And it took an amazing amount of time to freeze dry bread, but it also made my roasting shack approximately 7,000 degrees. And I was like, this is not going to work for me. I got to work in there, and I didn't have air conditioning in there at the time. And so at the time I noticed it was also very loud. And then I remembered my friend Chef Brett has his freeze dryer in a room, and he has a hole in the wall and the loud vacuum pump in the garage through the wall, so they don't have to listen to the pump. So like, picture a really loud window air conditioning unit. That's how loud it is. I say that because a lot of people don't realize that till they get it. and then they get it thinking they're going to put it in their kitchen, and then it annoys the crap out of them because it's super loud and it's super hot, right? So a lot of people put it in a utility room or something where they can open the windows, run a fan, whatever. It's or even an outbuilding. I know some people put them in outbuildings. The oil changes, deep cleaning, resources on how to freeze dry what were all really important at the beginning. And that started with that call from Jake. Retired by 40 and Betty's Harvest Right freeze dryer group on Facebook, and they're also on MeWe, are the best resources I've had for freeze drying. You will get some Karens if you're like, hey, I'm thinking about renting access to my freeze dryer. How much should I charge? I figured it out, by the way. It's about $20 per day of freeze drying. Some Karens will come out and talk to you about food law. You don't care about food law, right? So just ignore the Karens and go with the people, because there's a whole bunch of people who will help you there. These people have tried to freeze dry things you've never thought of freeze drying. And that's why you want to have people on your side, because you can say, how do I freeze dry strawberries, for example? Somebody's already figured out how thin to cut them, how to place them out there, and what temperature to dry them at. Because my freeze dryer, you freeze dry it, and then there's like at the end, there's a final dry where it's in the vacuum chamber, in a vacuum, it's cold on the outside, and the trays under the food heat up, which causes the sublimation, which is going straight from ice to gas, which is the freeze drying process. And you can have it at 124 degrees. You can have it at 98 degrees. Like, you can choose. The lower the temperature, the longer it takes for it to finish freeze drying. But then, it's gentler on things like basil, for example. So you end up with a better product if you go with a lower temperature. Some things you want to have a higher temperature. All of that information is available in these two groups. Oil changes seemed like a big deal to me. And so I got the Premier pump on my freeze dryer. And they sent it to me with the wrong pump. So I had the wrong pump, and I was like, why did I get the wrong pump? And we went around and around, and they were like, well, if you'll give us a couple $100, we'll let you keep that pump so we don't have to mail it back and forth, and we'll send you the Premier pump. And that's what they did. So I have two pumps. And the Premier pump, you change the oil about every 50 batches, or when it gets cloudy. The basic pump, which is no longer available, by the way, you would have to do it every 3 to 5 loads. Now, I say which is no longer available because the Premier pump is now standard with the freeze dry units. I don't even think that other pump is available. Last I heard, it wasn't anyway. You can actually get your own vacuum pump and hook it up to a Harvest Right freeze dryer. The cool thing about Harvest Right is there are all these components working together, and it's not hard to figure out what to buy, not necessarily directly through Harvest Right if you need to, on some of the components. And a lot of people do that. They'll buy the base model, and then they would get the oilless pump somewhere else and hook it up. Now, Harvest Right's probably not going to support you on that if you have tech support questions, but that's something that people do. And the way I know this is I'm in these Facebook groups and MeWe groups, Betty's Harvest Right freeze dryer and Retired at 40. So I thought the oil changes would be awful, but I have my freeze dry pump to the side on one of those little Dollar Tree step stool things that are plastic, which is high enough for me to be able to put a mason jar under it. And I just do, if I'm going to do an oil change, I do the freeze dry. And then I put when the load is done and I take it out and I put it through defrost, I drain the oil while it's still hot, because it comes out better when it's still hot, into the mason jar, which the pump is high enough to do. And then I pour a little bit more clean oil through there, sort of to oil rinse it out. And then I put the oil in, the fresh oil in. And I realized it takes 5 minutes of my time. And I learned how to do that because I watched a YouTube video from Retired on 40 doing that. And I was like, oh, I don't have to sit here and watch the oil drain. So that's easy. So it just became, like anything on the homestead, part of the function, or this is how you do it. And then I had this Premier pump sitting around for 9 months before I used it. I just kept doing oil changes every 3 loads. I learned you can filter the oil by taking a Brita pitcher, scritching up a toilet paper roll in a specific way that you can see Retired at 480 do on YouTube, and you put it in there and it filters all the stuff out of the oil, you can reuse the oil. I thought I was going to have to be buying all this oil for this thing all the time, but no, you can filter the oil. Here's where you can't filter the oil. If you have done garlic and you filter that oil, it will still smell of garlic. So what I started doing is things that, like garlicky things like garlic or chili or soups or stews where garlic is welcome, I use that set of oil for that. And candies, which have fruity flavors, which you also don't really want in your chili or garlic, but it's okay if there's a slight tinge of fruit. I would do that in milk. I would do that over there, right? So that was something I noticed. I'm a super taster, so I taste and smell things other people don't. The two things that really make the oil continue to add smells are like garlicky, oniony things. And when I did my candy experiment with the Skittles, I got like fruity tooty flavors coming out of the oil even after I filtered it. So I have dedicated candy oil called Candy. And I have dedicated garlic oil, which is in there right now. So I'm only doing garlic related things at this time, which is most of my travel meals. It's all good. I learned how to deep clean it. And when I learned how to deep clean it, I realized how simple the design is and how that benefits me. I learned that I can turn the freeze dryer into a vacuum sealer for vacuum sealing half-gallon jars of things. So it's like a vacuum canner as well. And it was all like a lot of learning in about a 5-week period of time. And then it was like second nature once I got through that. So at first it seemed hard, and then it seemed easy. I learned to wear gloves when moving the food from the trays to the jars because your hand has oils which will get sucked into the food, and that's gross because it's that dry, right? I learned how to make sure it was freeze dried all the way by touching it with my gloved hand to see if it felt cold at all. If it felt cold at all, that meant there was still moisture in there. Things with seeds, by the way, hang on to moisture. So I freeze dried things not long enough and ended up with jars of solid goo. Yep, you got to try it and fail in order to know how things work. I also learned that the Harvest Right freeze dry trays, you end up wanting more than one set. And you can buy Harvest Right ones, or you can get these alternative trays at Amazon. And I put the link in the show notes about that. They're like $25 or $27 for a set of, I don't know, 4 or so, or 6 or something. It's some like non-divisible by 8 number. So it's not 4. And those are great because they're half the size of a normal long tray, which is easier to carry. But also if I want to do a variety of things, I can kind of have them per tray. They're easier to handle. They run through the dishwasher easier. They're easier to clean. And they're way cheaper than buying a set of Harvest Right freeze dryer trays. So I loved that tip. That being said, you can fit more in those trays than the freeze dryer should have. So be careful, because if you overload your freeze dryer, what'll happen is the ice will come out from the sides and then it won't finish the load. Then you have to stop the load, put the stuff in the freezer, defrost the thing, restart, and go through a whole nother cycle to finish that load of too much food, which I've totally done that as well. A lot of things that you can do wrong on the freeze dryer, it's like there's a remedy for it. It's like mayonnaise, but you know, when mayonnaise goes wrong, something that never happened until somebody asked me what to do when mayonnaise goes wrong. And I'm like, I don't know. I've never failed. And the very next time I failed. And then I failed for 4 batches after that. I was so pissed off they asked me that question. Just kidding. It's all their fault. No, it was my fault. And anyway, so it's alternative trays are a good thing to have. I learned that you can go from normal food to freeze dried, or you can pre-freeze it. If you pre-freeze it in your freezer, which is already on, you save all the power of freezing the product in your freeze dryer. And I started just by doing it without freezing, did milk. It took 400,000 years or 4 days, as the case may be. And then I learned if I pre-freeze the milk, it takes 2 days. And that's a big difference, right? So I started pre-freezing milk and eggs all the time so that I would reduce the freeze drying time and I could get more product through the freeze dryer, A. And B, because I'm paying for the power in the freezer anyway. It is on. It's my deep freezer. I just had to reorganize how I had stuff in there. And you can buy these little stacking things to stack your trays 4 high in a upright freezer, or like they make little brackets for the top of your chest freezer. Like anything you've thought of that might be useful for a freeze dryer, somebody has 3D printed that and offers it for sale. It's pretty cool how that works. And that load to load smell transfer thing was just important for me. I don't think it's important for everybody. I will say this on the freeze dried food. It tastes very close to what the food tasted like before I put it in, but there's always a little bit of a slightly different taste after it's been freeze dried. It's not a bad taste, but if you're expecting to put pork chops in there and get them out and they taste exactly like pork chops, there'll be a slightly different flavor. I mean, with pork chops, actually, by the time you've added some garlic and stuff to them and cooked them, it's that you're not going to notice it there at all. But where I notice it is in milk and eggs in particular, because those are gentle flavors to begin with. So any additional flavor is just there. We usually serve some freeze-dried eggs at the spring workshop. We didn't do it this time, but I will say, like, quality of product that you get out of the freeze dryer is pretty darn cool. And being able to travel with powdered eggs and then reconstitute them works great. The key is to let time pass. So you will also end up freeze drying stuff, reconstituting it with the wrong amount of water or whatever, and it went wrong, or the water was too hot, or the water was too cold. And over time, you figure out how to reconstitute different things. Those 2 resources I mentioned, Betty's Harvest Right Freeze Dryer and Retired at 40, are another great way to talk about reconstituting food. I do milk with my steamer and one of those little things. And then the eggs, I always put the 1-to-1 water in, fork whisk it, and wait. And then I do other things for cooking. And before I put the eggs in, I whisk it again with my fork. And that works great for me. The key with eggs is get the right ratio of water to eggs. And if your powder has lumps in it with eggs, before you put the water in, stir it until it is just a bunch of powder. Because if you have lumps, those lumps are going to end up lumps later. So those are all things I had to learn just through trial and error. And the deal is this: if you freeze dry food and put it away and never touch it again, then if there's ever a time you need it, you won't know how to do it. And so then you'll go through all that trial and error when you actually just need to get stuff done, if you're using it for an emergency or something. And so that's why I eat my freeze-dried food. I'm like, I might as well see how the eggs work, because if I ever need the egg, it'd be good to know what to do with the eggs. And now I know what to do with the eggs. So back when I first got the freeze dryer, I was using that machine as many times as I could until it got too hot to run the machine, because I was running the machine outside. And once we got over about 90 degrees, and it would take longer. It's not good for the freeze dryer to run in that extreme of a temperature. And I didn't have it in an air conditioning room. So every time I could run it, I did. And what I was running it through it were leftovers. So anytime I had leftover anything that seemed like it would freeze dry well, I would put it there. I figured out that you can freeze dry meat that's cooked or meat that's raw. It depends on what you want on the other side. I mostly freeze dry cooked meat, although I would like to try a whole raw steak just for the fun of it. I know that'll be fun to probably take 16 years to freeze dry that and see if I can like reconstitute it and, get the steak and cook it while backpacking. That'd be pretty cool. That'd be a very special dinner. It would take a lot of energy to do that on the backpack. So it's not something you do every day, but wouldn't that be fun? Or you could cook it to medium rare in your sous vide, dry it, freeze dry it, and just reconstitute it and sear it off, cooking it. I don't know if that would work or not. That's something I haven't played with, but a lot of leftovers. What I haven't freeze dried is like salad, because I don't need salad powder. Things that are, if you freeze them, become structurally gross. Don't usually freeze dry all that great either. Surplus garden things. What I found in particular is that broccoli, which you don't can, which you blanch and freeze, that's the best way to store broccoli, or dehydrate. blanch it and freeze dry it, and it reconstitutes beautifully, and it retains more broccoli flavor than if you freeze it. So my broccoli tasted more like broccoli this year. The thing with broccoli is if you have too much stem of broccoli in there, the stem does not reconstitute all that awesome unless you like really boil the crap out of it, and then you have broccoli mush. So it's more the florets rather than the stem pieces. I was trying to keep all my stuff last year. So surplus garden things work great. Just know that if you would need to blanch it before you freeze it, you should blanch it before you freeze dry it, because the same problem will happen, like with green beans turning into sticks. You want to make sure they're blanched first. Surplus milk and eggs are like a no-brainer for that. I was getting goat's milk last year, and I would drink about a quarter gallon every week, and the rest of it would go in the freeze dryer. And then I used that powder in my coffee this winter, except for actually now I have a year-round milk share. Man, I wish I could get heavy whipping cream from those people. I might have to cancel my share because they're not doing heavy whipping cream, and really all I want is heavy whipping cream plus milk sometimes when it's cheese making. But anyway, that works really well. And the other thing I did in year one was ask myself a question. The question was this: can I make money using this thing so that it pays for itself? And so I started freeze drying Skittles and other candies, and I offered them for sale on Facebook Marketplace, and people went nuts. I don't know if they're still going nuts about it, but they went nuts about it. And so I was able to figure out that I would make approximately a $50 per load profit on Skittles on a medium freeze dryer. I have a medium freeze dryer. That link to the trays is for a medium freeze dryer. Those trays are made for all three sizes of freeze dryer. So there's 4 now because they have an extra large. But you could totally do that as a side hustle. And I thought that was pretty cool to be able to, offset the investment of the freeze dryer. You could turn it into a side hustle. You have to be ready to sell if you're going to do that, right? Like, we have people at every event with freeze dried things for sale who are investing their time and effort and money in selling that. And that helps offset having a freeze dryer for their own personal use, which is pretty darn cool. So that was the first year. Now I'm 3 years in. I'm going on my 3rd year with the thing. How am I using it now? I use it a lot differently than that. First year, it was just like, it was new appliance romance time where I was just like freeze drying all the thing. And what I ended up with were bins and bins and bins and jars and jars and jars of freeze dried food, more than I could ever possibly eat. That's not true, but a lot. And you got to store that somewhere. And we all know that I say you should store what you use and use what you store. And the problem was I wasn't using what I store. I still have from Spring Workshop 2021, all the leftover cold cuts rolled up into tubes, dried. And I take a bag of those every so often on a trip because it's a good keto snack. But man, I overbought the cold cuts for that event. I've actually got that down to a science now. And B, like, how many bins of bags of cold cut tubes does a person really need to keep on hand, right? Maybe some, that makes sense. But at the end of the day, I got to store it if I'm going to have it. So now I approach my freeze dryer with my goal is to use the food within 2 years or sell it to somebody. Why would I do that? Because a freeze dried piece of food, it'll last 20 years. So why would I take something that's intended for storage and only use it for 2? Well, it's a superior way of preserving food. Flavor wise and vitamin retention wise, it's a pretty good way to preserve food. I want to use it within 2 years because I have a rotation going through my pantry, and my pantry is a certain size, and I can allocate a small amount of space for long-term food storage or lightweight food storage. But if I'm going to continue living mostly off of what I can produce on the homestead, minus seafood, and work that way, then I need to have invested time, money, space in a system that does that. And so what I did is I worked the freeze dryer into that system. The other thing is I have a philosophy that resilience equals regeneration, not just in your food and pantry. Like if I use the lettuce and grow more lettuce, then I have more lettuce and it's a regenerative system and I can collect the seeds and plant the seeds, right? Like that's a regenerative, resilient system. But I see that in all walks of life. How am I regenerating the money I need to pay the bills? Regenerating the relationships that I need, you know. It all sounds very selfish, but it is and it isn't, right? So if I take the freeze dryer and only use it for one thing, then that doesn't make sense. As I said, I have some long-term storage of eggs and stuff that will last me a few months if I needed to, but I'm rotating that through too. That's just like that's ground zero for me in my pantry. And what I really want is resilience equaling regeneration so that as something is used, it's refilled. And there's a system in place in my real world that gets us there. Keto travel snacks. The more I travel, the more at risk I am of getting whacked by my allergy. And so I've really stepped up what I am freeze drying with the purpose of using it on specific business trips coming up. Like I literally have started cooking for the Permaculture Technology Jamboree, a place where one would think a person could go and not get poisoned. I don't know that because things that I'm allergic to are like normal foods other people can eat and grow. So I'm like, I'm just going to come with some meals and then nobody has to deal with high maintenance, Nicole, right? Nicole does her own high maintenance thing. It also keeps me on plan with my diet because when left to my own resources with a menu with a hamburger and french fries on it, I'm going to order it and I'm going to eat the fries. And that's not, like once in a while, that's okay. But on 75 hard, it's not okay at all. No cheat meals, right? So I don't even have the temptation if I'm like, I'm just going to eat this wonderful chicken stew I made or this chili or these other things. Like I have, as I said, the cold cuts, I have freeze-dried cheeses, and none of it requires refrigeration. It's lightweight. It doesn't take up that much space and it does not require refrigeration. So I can just throw it in my bag. I have my little food bag and I'm done. I don't even if I miss the grocery store, all I got to do is add water and it's ready to go. I do targeted surplus. So like the broccoli, for example, I had 6 or 8 half-gallon jars of freeze-dried broccoli this year going into the winter, which was awesome. It was really nice to not just have green beans as a side dish all winter long. And that was nice. But I also some things I want canned, like green beans, but I'd also like them freeze-dried. So I target how much I want freeze-dried versus canned or frozen or whatever. And I target how many stews I have in a bag that you just add water, which is that solves my problem of when I'm too sick to even boil my canned stew to eat. Like all I got to do is get hot water into this bag or jar and I have soup and it's a meal and it's nutritious. And I no longer have to buy the commercial canned soup, which I was buying a couple cans every year and putting it aside so that I could have my own thing, right? Have my own sick kit if I needed it. Herbs, 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 and garlic. If you're not going to store them fresh and you're going to store them dried, the best way to dry them is a freeze dryer. The second best way to dry them is room temperature. The third best way to dry them is in your Excalibur. The quality of my spices has gone through the roof with the addition of freeze drying. It's amazing. They maintain a vibrant green color like for basil and the flavor is super powerful. And when you like food like I do, it's great to have that. So the difference between 2021 and 23 is also frequency of use. When left to my own devices and not too busy, I run it about once a week. I was running it 3 times a week, 2 to 3 times a week, depending on how long loads took in 2021. So I have reduced how often I'm running it because I have stopped producing so much surplus that I have to figure out how to store the surplus and I don't have anywhere to store it. I'm already putting things in base camp basement that I can't store here related to events. So I don't need to. And actually, that was my root cellar last year. I need to go over there and make sure there's no squash left over there. But yeah, that was my root cellar last year because I thought we were going to rip up the prepper pantry. Thank goodness we didn't do that. Oh, that would have been awful. So I guess the real question for people is it worth it? And the answer is it depends. If you are at a place in your budget where a $2,500 machine is unfathomable, like you're driving a $500 car and you're barely keeping it running and you don't have extra money for it, you should absolutely not buy a freeze dryer. Unless you've figured out how to turn that into a profitable thing that takes you out of that situation. And even then, if you're putting on a credit card, think hard, because every time you start a side hustle, you got to sell. That being said, for me, it has been worth it from an investment standpoint into my overall homegrown cooking adventure. And the first thing is the quality of the food I get from it has been great. And it has reduced the time that I spend on individual, like at the meal, cooking the meal sometimes when I'm in a hurry, and still kept me nutritious and homegrown. So for me, that alone has been worth it. Now, from a investment standpoint of $2,500, have I gotten that back in sales? No, I've gotten about $600 back in sales of candy. And I stopped trying to do that. I decided that I'm going to staunchly just be proud that I was able to make this thing happen, that I can freeze dry stuff and have it at events if I need to, or for business trips or any of those other things. The convenience is amazing. The convenience of being able to take something like boom, 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 and I'm packed for food for a trip like Exit, the one I'm doing this week to Exit and Build Land Summit. It's great. I am going to the store for something, but I didn't have to go on a shopping trip, buy the jerky, buy the blah, 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 the stuff I don't usually keep on hand because I'll just eat it if it's here. It's like the amount of money I'm going to spend getting ready for this trip food-wise is $10 on some sugar-free, like not sugar substitute-free, but no sugar added meat sticks because I haven't made those yet. And everything else comes out of the freeze-dried cabinet. So how much money did I spend on those ingredients? Some. And how much on the power? It's about $8 in power per load that I'm spending. So there's some investment there. But at this point, it's money that's already gone. And I'm not like feeling this. I just spent $75 for food for 4 days or $150 for food for 4 days. And I'm going to go out to eat while I'm there, right? So the convenience is amazing. Longevity, I do like that if I don't use my eggs within 2 years, I still can keep those eggs for 20 years. I will still use the oldest package first. And in the couple of years I've had the freeze dryer, I haven't noticed a downgrade in quality as long as you get it all the way freeze dried to begin with. So those are the reasons I think it's worth it. If you're thinking of using it to start a side hustle, the three things I've seen work best are candy, and you got to sell it, whole meals to other preppers who want to have some long-term storage and they want it to be like healthy, organic, homegrown, that sort of thing. And they don't want to buy a freeze dryer. Got to sell it, but you can sell it. I see preppers all the time saying, hey, I want like 20 meals. I want it freeze dried, and I'd rather, pay somebody in the network than over Mountain House. There you go. There's your audience. Like that's your target market right there. So that's the second one. And then the third one is load rental. So if you have a community like the Holler Neighbors, for example, or Living Free in Tennessee, or any of the other communities around you, people may want once or twice a year to freeze dry something. You can offer that as a service. Yes, cottage laws are different in every state about if that's legal or not. You got to make that decision yourself, but you can offer that as a service. Now, some ways to make it so you are not processing the food is to rent access to your freeze dryer, teach people how to load it, and they do the work. I don't see how that's violating any cottage food law. If you're doing the actual work, that's where if somebody noticed, you could totally get in trouble. You have to assess the risk for that. But that load rental thing, I think, is one of the most underutilized business models on a freeze dryer. Because just think about it. If you get $20 a day for that and you do 20 days, that's, you're getting close to getting your money back. So you just got to find the people who want it. So that's just, I just wanted to do an update on freeze drying today. There is if you are an LFTN member, there's a webinar on how to get started with freeze drying on the membership portal. And if you decide to get one, use my Harvest Right affiliate link if you're getting the Harvest Right one. But also go watch that webinar. It goes into more detail on the things specific tricks and tips and things you'd want to do as part of having a Harvest Right. What I have heard in the last year is that the quality of the Harvest Rights that more people are getting broken ones. And I think that's a growing pain for the company. So I've heard both good things and bad things. If you get a broken one and are not getting the customer support you need, keep calling. Keep calling. I really feel like I've heard they've broken down some on their ability to support customers. And I think that based on my experience with the company, the former couple years, I really hope that they will turn that around. And I think that they are doing their best to turn that around. There's not a lot of competition in the market, you see. There is one other company that does freeze dryers, and I have not worked with them at all. I'd love to test their machines. They're about twice as expensive too, but they're made in Nashville, Tennessee. So like that would be a no-brainer for me to test. So that's all. So that's just a word of caution on Harvest Right. Like I haven't heard lately, but I'd say about 6 months ago, I kept hearing about things not working, repairs needing to be done, it taking a long time it's like you've put all this money in and then the stupid thing doesn't work, right? So that's just a buyer beware thing, and I don't want to misrepresent the company. On to questions before we wrap up. What does storage look like after freeze drying, canning, bagging, etc.? So the two ways that I store my freeze-dried food, one in mason jars in a cool, dark cabinet. So not out where the light can hit them, because the light will make the color go away. Unless I'm like actively using a jar, I have active jars. And what you do is you put the product in a jar and vacuum seal it. Technically, you should not have to have an O2 absorber in there or a moisture absorber or desiccant of any kind. If you live in humid Tennessee, you might feel like you need to double down and add a desiccant to keep it dry, which I do when I can, unless I'm going to use it within a year. I have found that the mason jar storage works really, really, really well. The other way is in Mylar bags. And you all know where I get my Mylar bags. I have cases of Mylar bags. I consulted with Toby at Discount Mylar Bags before I chose what size to get, because I was going to make the mistake everybody makes and get the big bags so I don't have to put things in as many bags. And he's like, yeah, but most people use this size bag because that's how much they can use, Nicole. And I was like, oh, smart. So in the Mylar bags, most sealers have a hard time sealing it. You want the 7 mil ones, which are thicker. No window to see in there. If you have the window, that's a way that some of the air can permeate. It won't store as long. Same thing. You put an O2 absorber in there, seal it, and that will actually kind of acts as a vacuum. I actually use my chamber vac with the time for seal turned up, and it works fine. Most of the time, though, because I get the Ziploc kind of Mylar bags, I just do the Ziploc because I know I'm going to use it anyway within a year, and I clean and reuse the bags. That's what I've been doing. For stuff that like eggs I have that are going to be in a longer term rotation, I'm not reusing the bags, but I will reuse an egg bag for something I'm going to take on a trip, right? It's fine. So that's what I use for storage. Next question. Oh, it's just a comment. Is there a way to make your own bouillon? Yes, and I have. I do bone broth in the freeze dryer, and I don't add salt to it. So it's saltless bouillon, basically. And it makes wonderful broth. All you do is add water and salt. The reason I didn't add salt is when you freeze dry salt, you know what you get? Salt. Well, I already have dry salt that I can add to stuff. So it takes up less volume if I don't have the salt with it. And for me, it's okay to just add salt later. Other people might want that all as one. So, make your decision based on how you're going to use it. Steve says the Premier pump is much quieter than the standard. It's now being, the included one is way quieter than the one I used to have that was super loud. it's still super loud. And you probably don't want it in your living room if loud noise or like bothers you. Miss Fredwina says, do you use parchment paper in it regularly? I used to use parchment paper all the time. I would probably, if I was going to do strawberries this year, which I'm not planning to, I would use it for that because they might kind of stick. I used to use it for everything but milk and eggs because everybody was like, your stews are going to stick or whatever. So I put chili in there, I put parchment paper, and then that keeps it from sticking. Well, I noticed because the parchment paper ripped once that it didn't really stick. So I use a spatula to take it off of the tray. Most of my stuff, when freeze dried all the way, doesn't stick that bad. Some of it does. And the some of it that does are things that are like fruits and that kind of thing have stuck more. So I use parchment paper for that. And I just cut it to size on the tray. Some people buy silicone pads that are special made for that to help get stuff out. I guess I just don't really, if I'm doing candy, I use that. I use parchment paper because the candy, so it's like things with sugars in it seem to be the things that you have the biggest risk for that. .com Cowgirl says, what's the best value size of the Harvest Right dryer? The small, medium, or large to use for home use, plus rental to neighbors and run side hustle settings selling Skittles? Ooh, that's a hard one. I don't know the answer to what's the best size. I know that I'm glad I got the medium for me based on the size of loads I do. And if I was producing it with side hustle, I would probably go with a large at that point. I saw somebody say, oh, it looks like it might be better to get two smalls instead of a large if you're going to be doing multiple things because you can only do one kind of thing per freeze dryer. Yes and no. I can do broccoli and green beans in the same load and it'll work fine because they will freeze dry at approximately the same timeline. What I wouldn't do would be like milk and broccoli because the milk takes way longer. It is better to do all one thing in the freeze dryer. And like the chili load I just did was not a full load, but I had it equally on the 4 trays so that it would not get confused about if it was done or not with its sensors. And that worked fine. So, I mean, unless you know you're just going to be doing a bunch of little loads, I just try to save up by using, that's why I have the multiple trays, right? I can do the little trays of milk. And when I have a full load over a couple of weeks, they've been in the freezer, so it doesn't matter. And I just freeze dry the whole thing. What one thing made or helped you make this change in your life? Which change? Zipper88, which change are you talking about? Put it in the comments. If you get it in there before we sign off, I will answer your question. K-Bonk, do you freeze dry coffee? I have freeze dried coffee. I don't freeze dry coffee because it takes a really long time and it's not like, it's a lot of money to invest in something like even hollow roast freeze dried in my freeze dryer it's good, but it's no better than the packets I can just get at the store anyway. And so it's a lot of money for something that's not a superior product. I have actually looked into commercial production of freeze-dried hollow roast coffee so that there's a combination of micro-ground coffee and freeze-dried coffee to give it a better, more robust mouthfeel. And that seems to be the better way to go from a quality standpoint if you're doing the craft roasted coffee approach. But I just didn't really like the outcome. So when I hike, I actually buy other freeze-dried coffees. I like I actually like Black Rifle's freeze-dried coffee the best so far out of all the ones I've tasted. Starbucks is edible. Black Rifle coffee actually tastes good in the little tubes. And then all the other freeze-dried ones I've ever tasted are terrible. I don't know what else is out there now as far as that. Mostly, if I'm going to bring freeze-dried, it would be probably Black Rifle is the best flavor. I just bring coffee grounds though. Like unless I'm going to be out for weeks at a time, I can bring enough and a pour over cone. That's what I do. And then I just, if I'm somewhere where I can bury the grounds, I bury the grounds. And if I'm not, then I carry them out and it works great. And that's what I do when I'm on the road too. I'm going to be bringing ground coffee to exit and build. We're at an Airbnb. at the Permaculture Technology Jamboree where they serve coffee. I'm going to totally donate coffee to them for selfish reasons, that if the morning coffee is my coffee, it's delicious. But if they don't want that, it is organic, guys, though, so it's okay. If they don't want that, I'll have my pour over cone and I can still have hollow roast. So that's my plan. Okay, the question is, what made you make the keto change? I went keto in 2020 because I was 210 pounds and everything I tried hadn't worked. And I saw my friend Jack Spirko losing weight and I thought, well, it can't hurt to try. And the part about this that freaks me out the most is not drinking alcohol. At the same time, my neighbor Tactical was quitting alcohol. And I was like, hey, I bet it's easier for him not to drink if I'm not drinking around him. So I quit alcohol. And I mean, I still have a cocktail from time to time now, but I used to drink them every day. And I went keto and I immediately lost 20 pounds. Not immediately, but within like 2 months, I lost 20 pounds and I felt really good. And then I go on and off of keto. Like I'll do dirty keto, which is not keto at all, but it's generally low carb. And whenever I do that, especially if I have grain, like wheat is the worst. I get what I call wheat knee. I get like my joints get inflamed. I puff up. I retain water. And I've just taken that as a sign that I'm more ketovore. So I eat salads and vegetables from the garden. I will occasionally have something like a potato or mashed potatoes. I won't while I'm doing 75 hard. But I ate 3 strawberries today. That was 3 carbs this morning, fresh from the bush. I consider seasonal eating and whole foods to be healthy. And then I pair it with meats that we've raised or meats that I've sourced here. So they're high quality meats. And I just feel good. And, now that I've started 75 hard, I feel great, actually. I've had a couple tired days. Like my muscles were sore today because I can't remember what I did some crazy stuff this weekend, but I just feel good. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this update on freeze drying. If you have more questions about freeze drying, send them to me, Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com, and I'll do my best to work them into a future show. If you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can support me in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. 2, consider becoming a member. Head over to livingfreeintennessee.com to find out more. And our next webinar for members is June 1st, and it's developing your smart homestead plan. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.